The information economy has arrived. The world is teeming with innovation as new business models reinvent every industry. Inside Analysis is your source of information and insight about how to make the most of this exciting new era. Learn more at InsideAnalysis.com.
InsideAnalysis.com.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, welcome to the future indeed. It's time for another episode of the only coast-to-coast radio show that's all about the information economy. It's called Inside Analysis. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh, is here. And folks, we're so excited to talk about a pretty hot topic out there in the world of business. That is the cloud database. Cloud database migration in particular. We have lots of businesses that are looking at the cloud, recognizing it is the center of gravity in this new world of ours. And guess what? It's a very powerful mechanism these days, cloud computing, and can be leveraged in all kinds of different ways. And I can tell you the cloud database space is just white hot these days. And there's just no doubt the cloud is the future. It is the new center of gravity, as we say. But that doesn't mean all the data in the world is still in the cloud. And guess what? It'll never all be in the cloud. There's going to be quite a bit of data on-prem, on premises, as we call it, for various reasons: security, personally identifiable information, strategically valuable information for corporations, maybe part of their research and development. A lot of that is going to stay on-prem. And there are regulations that say certain data cannot go into the cloud. Now, I will say that there are lots of innovations in the cloud to enable cordoning off data, to enable regionally located data, to basically adhere to things like the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, out of the EU, which is sort of de facto regulation here in the United States. And what I mean by that is many corporations are just treating GDPR as if it applies to the US market as well as the European market. So it's something that we have to be cognizant of. Of course, the California Consumer Privacy Act, CCPA, also puts a heavy emphasis on responsibility in use of data, in storage of data, in leveraging data. And this is all good stuff. Now, if you're an ethical organization, you are already doing this kind of thing. So it's not going to be that hard, but it is something to keep in mind. But nonetheless, I promise you, cloud is the new center of gravity. We've got a couple guests today who are going to walk us through what they're working on, including Anita Kibunguchy-Grant from Google is on the line. And we'll hear from Andrew Oliver later in the show as well from MariaDB. And on the phone, Anita, thanks so much for dialing into the show today. Tell us a bit about yourself and what Google is doing in the world of cloud databases.
Amazing. Eric, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me on the show. It is such a pleasure to be talking to the audience here today. As Eric mentioned, my name is Anita Kibunguchy-Grant, and I lead the product marketing team here at Google, specifically focused on cloud databases. And I've been here at Google for the past 4 years. Previously, I was working on data analytics solutions, and I moved to the database solutions about a year and a half ago. So really excited to talk to everyone about how, we're seeing increase of databases moving into the cloud. And it's for the reasons that, most of you are very familiar with or you've heard of. When you think about pace of innovation, the agility the cloud provides, how you can think about managing your costs, how for some organizations, there's the opportunity to start to build new applications on the cloud. These are the things that we're seeing and we're hearing from many of our customers today.
Yeah, I'm quite sure. And I guess there was a pretty big announcement at the Google I/O Developers Conference just recently. Can you tell us what happened there and what's the implication of that?
Absolutely. Yes. So at Google I/O just this past week, we announced a new product into market called MariaDB for PostgreSQL. If you're very familiar with PostgreSQL, this is a open source database engine. And so with MariaDB, what we did at Google is, we call it the goodness of what, Google provides when you think about, disaggregation of compute and storage, bringing in that architecture and what we're good at Google, but then also bringing in the goodness of open source. So if you're a customer and you're thinking about, leveraging a solution that is powerful, a solution that is familiar with your ongoing tools like PostgreSQL, then MariaDB for PostgreSQL is that option for you. And so with MariaDB for PostgreSQL, what's also unique is that, we're thinking about folks who are looking to migrate from their legacy databases, and this provides a unique option for those mission critical applications.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. I'm looking at the announcement right now. And folks, guess what? There are so many PostgreSQL databases out there. And I think a lot of the companies using them have realized that they are, to a certain extent, hamstrung, and they have to find some way out of it. Now, I've been around this business a long time, over 20 years, I'm afraid to say. So I know that just the thought of a database migration is enough to scare the daylights out of any DBA or even any senior executive. But it used to be a heck of a lot harder than it is today. Now we have lots of technologies for being able to pull data from systems, to replicate databases. I was on a phone call this morning with a new company called Polyscale.ai. We're going to do a webinar with them next month, and they are attacking this. And in fact, they talked about Postgres databases as one of the key challenges. It's a real market opportunity for them. And it sounds like Google, once again, is focused on trying to solve for these kinds of problems. So can you tell us about AlloyDB? Is it just a software offering? Is it software and services? Tell us the nature of AlloyDB and how it works.
Yeah, so when you think about the core of Postgres system, it's a relational database, right? And I think what's unique about it is the idea of compatibility with Postgres. And so what you're seeing is that we're meeting customers where they are in their journey, right? For a customer or an enterprise who's made a decision on, I want to move Postgres, but I also want to make sure that I'm leveraging, the high availability, reliability, right? For those mission critical applications, that's what AlloyDB offers, right? It's almost like we're meeting customers where they are with their needs, right? Mm-hmm. We're taking an open source engine and we're also adding in and make it even better so then you can get the goodness, right? For a lot of your applications.
Yeah, because we were again talking about this just this morning. It's so funny. I keep having these instances where I have a conversation in the morning, and then on the radio we have a very similar conversation with different people, which tells you this is something going on. This is a market trend, right? And with database, let's face it, the key driver is always performance. How can I get the optimal performance with my database? So I'm going to move at the speed of business. I'm not going to be hamstrung. I'm not going to be facing performance issues and have people waiting on the phone. Oh, our systems are slow today. You always want the performance. And so the key becomes, how do you architect that performance? Can you talk about the sort of inner workings of AlloyDB? What went into the thought process, and how are you able to kind of bridge this gap and, as you say, meet customers where they are?
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things I just wanted to call out, in our performance test, when we looked at AlloyDB compared to just regular open source Postgres, we found out that AlloyDB was 4 times faster than standard Postgres. And this is for transactional workloads, right? And when you're thinking about your analytical queries, we were actually up to 100 times faster for analytical queries compared to standard Postgres. And so when I talked a little bit about yeah, I know, right? When we talk about, when we bring in the best of cloud, right? One of the most important things to call out is this idea of disaggregation of compute and storage, right?
Right.
Which means that if I wanted to add, sorry, go ahead, Eric.
No, go ahead. Yeah, keep going. I'm taking notes.
Yeah, absolutely. Disaggregation of compute and storage, which means if I want to scale my application, right, I can scale compute and storage independently of each other, right? It allows you to have massive scale-out architectures, and you start to get those performance speeds that are just at the levels that I just talked about, right? A couple other things that make AlloyDB unique is that we enable things like intelligent caching. As you know, when you have a caching system, it means it's a little easier to actually to get your data much faster. We've also added in some ML-enabled adaptive systems. So if you're thinking about trying to free your developers from the daily mundane tasks of vacuuming, performance tuning, just regular database management tasks, we've also abstracted those, and we're doing those automatically, right? So if you're a customer, you're getting the best of Postgres, which is open source, right, in a language that you're familiar with, but then we're also giving you the best of what cloud offers, right? When you think about fully managed architectures, right, with also a little bit of machine learning enabled systems too.
That's a huge deal. And just to explain to our audience here what Anita is talking about, we've heard all sorts of great things about machine learning. Machine learning is fantastic at being able to do tedious tasks at tremendous scale very easily. So very simple things like trying to understand what are the peak times for our typical workloads. When do people typically come in and we need some additional throughput? Or what time do certain sorts of transactions take place? Or it could be any number of things depending upon your business. But the point is, machine learning is great at being able to identify patterns in data, whether it be patterns in consumer behavior or patterns in system behavior, for example, if you're trying to tune something, and to be able to leverage machine learning on your data in the cloud, that's a really seriously big deal. Because if you try to do that on your own, which you absolutely can, a lot of the algorithms are free. You just have to kind of set up the workflows and get them and then patch that into your operational systems. But if Google is finding a way to abstract that complexity away from your environment, that just greases the tracks to let your organization leverage machine learning, which I promise you is a very seriously big deal. Anita, did I capture that correctly?
Yeah, I think you captured the essence of it correctly, right? And I think for what's unique with MariaDB is a couple of ways to look at machine learning is, the machine learning is running in the back end. So you as a customer don't even get to see it, right? It's almost like the thing that's just making your systems even better and your databases even better. But on top of that, even with MariaDB, we're also thinking about how do we integrate better with other AI and machine learning tools at Google, with technology like Vertex AI, which is an AI platform, right, for running machine learning models. So we're also thinking about, now let's imagine you want to do those insights, right, and get additional analytics on your data. How do we think about you connecting to systems like that, right? So it's a little bit of both where there's the back end when you don't get to see that, right? And then there's also the front end where you get to interact with it too.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, I was talking to an expert in our field just last week. I did an interview out at the ThoughtSpot conference in Las Vegas, and he talked about low code to pro code. And you kind of just hinted at that very reality, which is low code or no code, quite frankly, is what you're talking about, meaning the solution runs under the covers. The user doesn't even know what's happening. They just benefit from optimization. And folks, this used to take a lot of individuals, database administrators, for example, sysadmin, system administrators, manually checking things, optimizing indices, for example, optimizing various knobs in their environment. And what Anita is pointing out is that in the background, MariaDB already does that for you automatically, which is fantastic. That's the no code. But then pro code is what you just mentioned, where they're working with other AI engines, for example, to enable even greater functionality that you as an end user can control in terms of building the models, executing the models, building challenger models, all that kind of fun stuff. So you get the best of both worlds is kind of the point, right, Anita?
Exactly. That is the point right there, Eric.
No, this is amazing stuff. And folks, it's so exciting because it's almost like moving from the era when everyone used to work on their own cars. I remember that in the 1970s, every other person was an auto mechanic, but the engines were much simpler back then. It's much harder to be an auto mechanic these days, at least if you're not associated with a major brand, for lots of reasons, one of which is the engines are very specific. There are even particular tools you have to use to be able to get into certain parts, to open this, to open that. That's under the covers. But now the engines run so much better. There's one of my favorite comedians jokes about this. He's like, you young kids in the audience, you may think your car is old, but it was still built in the 2000s. And his point is that it used to be a thing, like your car starting used to be a real issue. That's not an issue anymore. A lot of the old issues that we ran into with databases, like performance, like redundancy, for example, just general capabilities, that used to be a problem, not really a problem in the future of these cloud-based databases, right? A lot of those problems have been solved for you, and now you just build on top of this much more stable foundation. What do you think, Anita?
It's such a good point, Eric, to bring up. I think that, part of our job when we're thinking about putting systems out for customers is how do we continue to make it easier and easier for customers to get value from building applications, right? Get value from focusing on the things that will help them innovate, right, and move faster. we're in a world where things are changing so much. We're in a world where, digital experiences are paramount, right, for companies out there. And so, yes, the more we can try to make it easier for our customers to be able to consume our solutions, get value from it, and really focus on the things they should be focusing on for their businesses, the better we are, right? And so in addition to, when we think about products like MariaDB, we're also thinking about this full platform, right? When we're thinking about products that we have, we have cloud-native products. These are products that are born in the cloud. When we think about, for us, products like Bigtable and Spanner, right, and even BigQuery, these are products that, offering you high availability, high reliability, right? We're looking at high performance as well, because we, again, want to make sure that customers are focused on the things that make their businesses better, right? But in addition, we have to realize that customers have also made a lot of investments in, to your point, like, tools like, PostgreSQL or MySQL, right? How do we continue meeting customers where they are with the tools that they're familiar with, right? So for us, a product like Cloud SQL does just that, right? Easy, again, lift and shift of your MySQL, SQL Server, or Postgres databases into the cloud, right? Again, when we started this conversation, it was all about how do we think about migrations and how do we simplify those. And so we're constantly thinking about how do we make this journey easy for our customers over and over again,
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And we want it to be seamless, right? You don't want to have to know how to construct database tables and do joins and do all these other things. The business doesn't need to worry about that. That has been traditionally the role of the IT department, the role of DBAs, and like I said, sysadmins and so forth. And those folks are still have plenty of stuff to tackle, right? The key is that we're solving a lot of the lower level challenges such that we can focus on the higher level business challenges, like separating yourself from the pack. And what's so exciting here is that by solving those lower level problems, we really do open the door. I mean, I'll give you just one small example here. I was showing my better half this morning. She was working on, I was getting her into Google Docs and pointing out simple things like you don't have to hit the save button anymore, Command S. Right? We had to learn to do Command S all the time to save and lose your work. That's all done automatically for you. It's automatically saved. And now you can do collaboration in Google Docs. I'm a huge Google Docs fan, I have to say. I'm in there all the time. I think it's the best of the best in terms of what it offers in that workspace, which is everyday functionality. That's what we want. And now with MariaDB from Google, they're really taking the next step, enabling Postgres SQL in the cloud. Don't touch that stuff. That dial, folks. Will be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Take us to the future.
All right, folks, take us to the future indeed, where all of your database problems will be solved easily and quickly and efficiently. Your host here, Eric Kavanaugh, talking to a couple of guests today on the show. And next up is Andrew Oliver from a company called MariaDB. And for those who don't know, MariaDB was a fork from MySQL a number of years ago. As I recall, Montevidenius, wasn't he the creator of MySQL? And then when Oracle bought Sun, which owned MySQL at the time, I believe, that very day, he forked the project, the open source project, to create MariaDB. And that's quite a few years ago. So a lot has changed since then. And next up, Andrew Oliver can tell us a bit about that. So Andrew, tell us what's going on in the world of SkySQL for MariaDB and your other offerings in that space.
Yeah, so a lot has happened since then. We do maintain a lot of the, the compatibility with the MySQL and MariaDB ecosystem. We feel like MariaDB is a far more advanced database now than it was then, and has a lot of features you won't find in MySQL. With that said, with our SkySQL offering, our database as a service in the cloud, it supports both AWS and GCP. And it works with our on-premise offering as well, so you can do data transfer between them. But with our SkySQL offering, we offer the traditional MariaDB open source database with enterprise features. We have MariaDB Column Store if you're doing larger scale analytics. And we also have our distributed SQL offering, MariaDB Expand. And Expand is able to scale out horizontally. It does this in a different way than a Aurora or AlloyDB, where they push it into the storage layer. Instead, it uses a algorithm in order to make sure that the data stays consistent. So it's able to offer superior consistency, large scale out, and it's a SQL database, but with our offering, we do support JSON data types and other NoSQL-like features. So it's really intended to give developers an easy way to start with their existing relational data or develop new applications and scale out as they need. So SkySQL is a really good place to do that on multiple clouds, especially if you've also got on-premise databases that you need to coordinate with or replicate into the public cloud. And we feel that SkySQL is a really good offering in order to support development teams who are trying to migrate to the cloud. And we have existing customers that have migrated from Oracle and save a bunch of money. We've got everything from social media to financial companies who are running on SkySQL and MariaDB technologies.
Yeah, that's cool stuff. And migrating to the cloud, I was joking earlier that it's something that always scares the pants off of people, because you wonder what's going to get left behind, how painful is it going to be. You talked about a couple different features, one like validation, basically. Walk us through the process of some brick and mortar company biting the bullet and realizing they have to migrate to the cloud. What are some best practices for doing the blocking and tackling necessary to make sure you get it done right?
So we do a lot for you. So first off, MariaDB has some Oracle compatibilities and features in it that make it easier. It is a SQL database, so migrating from a SQL database to a SQL database is not usually the same order of magnitude of going to a different type of database. But we have, say, Financial Network, F&I. They moved from they were a long-term Oracle customer on GCP, and they moved to SkySQL on GCP, and they've saved like 80% on their database costs. But one of the key pieces of this was that they took advantage of our Oracle compatibility features. And they didn't do it initially to save money. They did it because they were running into barriers and restrictions and the kind of scale that they needed. One of the things that we do that's a little different than some of the hyperscalers is that we also offer SkyDBA service. So you can get both self-service in the cloud, launch a database when you need to launch a database, monitor it, manage it, the same stuff that every database as a service vendor will tell you. But we also give you the ability to work with a virtual member of your team from MariaDB itself. So we have you can have a fractional or dedicated DBA from MariaDB working with your team in real time, doing things like tuning the database or any of those sorts of regular maintenance type things that people have. And when you think about how many different databases a lot of companies have and how many different platforms and applications and all of that kind of stuff, we're really kind of focused on simplifying it. You need fewer, more capable databases, and you need the kind of personal support necessary to make this work in an era of complex applications, really.
Yeah, and of course, hybrid cloud or multi-cloud, I should say, is going to be the norm going forward. Talk to us about how you can kind of enable an abstraction layer to be able to leverage multi-cloud, which, again, I don't think it's ever going to go away. I think we're looking at a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud future where some is on-prem, the rest is in the cloud. How do you play well with others, basically, to kind of ensure consistency across all those environments?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Whether you look at stats from Gartner, you look at anybody, they'll tell you multi-cloud is many companies' strategy. I don't believe there are non-multi-cloud companies. I think there are only two types of multi-cloud companies. There's the ones that do it on purpose and the ones that do it by accident. So if you're like, oh, we're only going to standardize on one cloud platform, and then you go buy some third-party software. Well, guess what? That third-party software doesn't happen to run on the cloud that you want. Are you going to wait or whatever? So then you've got multi-cloud. If you buy a company, you become multi-cloud. If you no matter what, you're going to end up a multi-cloud company. A lot of companies do this. Or if you expand globally, whatever is your favorite cloud provider in Western Europe or the U.S. may not be your favorite cloud provider even available in parts of Asia or other parts of the world, and it may not have the best availability or best data centers or pricing or any of that kind of stuff. So everybody's going to be multi-cloud. MariaDB, SkySQL. So it works on both AWS and GCP. Our MariaDB Enterprise works on your cloud. You can self-manage it. You can install it on your own private cloud. And we have people that are even doing DR between MariaDB Enterprise and SkySQL in order to, especially like manufacturing, what have you, so that they can have something on the edge or have something in their data center that meets those requirements, and then also replicate to the cloud. And I think you're spot on with both hybrid and with multi-cloud. There's always going to be regulations and things like that, and there's always going to be places where there's some specific latency or other types of requirements that make it more optimal to run locally in your own data center. And our stuff is really keeps that in mind. Our everything from our management console to our technology is intended to keep that in mind. We don't have some sort of special hardware storage layer where we've shoved some of the database, where we've gutted some of the database and shoved that in the storage layer. This is stuff that runs the way a database is expected to run.
Yeah, right. No, that's a good point. And, I'd like to throw out something too, then we could pick this up in the roundtable next. We'll bring Anita back in to the next segment. But, there's this concept of lift and shift, right? And a lot of people think, okay, we want to leverage the cloud. Let's go ahead and lift this environment and deploy it in the cloud. That's really not the best way to go for lots of different reasons. I think moving to the cloud really begs the question, how can we optimize all of this? How can we come up with a better architecture to enable better customer experience? Anita mentioned being able to leverage machine learning, which is a really big deal. It's important to take this as an opportunity to redesign and redeploy. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that there's two things. I think that on one hand, you want to have features in your database so that your existing applications can migrate quickly. But we're not going to stop innovating there. I mean, great, you have this database that's compatible with the database that you're already running, but what else is it doing for you? How is it, if we look at MariaDB Expand, it's read-write scale. This is different from an Aurora and Alloy DB, where you're trying to push the scalability in the storage layer. This is horizontal, add more nodes, you get additional writers, you get additional read nodes all in one. So any node can do anything. So this sort of scale out where you can handle multiple failures across multiple availability zones, I think is absolutely critical. And I think also adding some of the chewy kind of features that database developers are looking for is incredibly important. So we've added, say, columnar indexes to our distributed SQL offering, allowing them to be able to run ad hoc queries. They don't have to create a perfect index. They can use the columnar index with the row-based index, do ad hoc queries, operational analytics, without creating another copy of the data on yet another database. I think people don't really want to run 15 different databases. They want to run fewer databases. So saying, we have yet another database, we're not trying to do that. We're trying to make our databases more capable so you can run any workload on them on any cloud at any scale. That's our mission as a company, and what kind of goes into our software and platform.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You're enabling rapid analytics without having to deploy a separate database. I mean, I'm in the analytics business and have been for 20 years, so I appreciate the power of an analytic engine. there are companies that have built their entire product suite all around the goal of enabling rapid analytics. And I think what's clever about your approach is that you're just layering something into the architecture that you're pretty sure people are going to want, which is ad hoc queries for operational analytics. Again, the less complexity, the more value to the company, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and also the more valid the data, right? What's your transactional boundary? It's most true on the one database. When you start copying data across, what's the validity of the data, and how do you put what is the time index? How do you put Humpty Dumpty back together? And you're best off with your data lineage if you don't have to move stuff around. And our tools are also looking at how you can optimize. We have machine learning built into SkySQL to tell you, here's what your workload is like, and here's how you do it better. Here's something you might want to consider. Here's what we're seeing. Here's how things are going. So that you can really kind of optimize the way that your databases are running.
Yeah, and you brought up a really good point here, which is where machine learning and AI will manifest. Where will we see the fruits of that AI labor, if you will? And I think the key is suggestions, right? We're going to get a lot more of that from these various engines where you'll just get a suggestion. Hey, do you want to try this? Do you want to try that? And that way the user can just say yes or no. And the algorithms can learn from your behavior, but that's very useful because a lot of times, as much as you'll think through a particular architecture, a workflow, there are going to be things that you miss, and there are going to be dependencies maybe that you underestimated. There will be hurdles you didn't expect. And so to get these suggestions, I think that's how we're going to actually witness AI and machine learning transforming business. What do you think?
I think that's absolutely true. I think from a database perspective, we hope to continue to make it to where you have less to do, where we've taken care of more and more of it for you. And I mean, that's why MariaDB, for instance, doesn't need a vacuum. We've automated some of those sort of processes and built it into the architecture. So I think that, yes, the suggestions and those sort of AI-based prompts are absolutely critical today. And I think in the future, we'll see the best AI will be the AI I don't even know is there, that I don't have to worry about.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. We got 1 minute left before break. What's one critical success factor or one critical failure point that you want people to know about?
So I think that looking at your database architecture, you should look for your cloud migration. You should look for compatibility features, but you should also look at what's the future. So what does this do for me going forward? Is this going to give me what I need to build my services for my everyday applications going forward? Do we have a future in this, or is it just a compatibility layer? What features that developers need are in this new cloud platform? I think that's absolutely critical, and being able to simplify your architecture. We went really complicated in the 2010s, and now I think everybody's like, I don't need more databases. I need fewer that just handle failures and scale.
That's funny. I think that's exactly right. Simplicity is a beautiful thing out there, and you're right that we got pretty complex there for a while. A lot of value came out of that, but I think simplicity is going to rule the day. And developer first is something to really keep in mind. Don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks. Welcome back to Inside Analysis, talking all about cloud migration today and cloud databases. We've been talking to Anita Kibunguchy-Grant of Google and also Andrew Oliver of MariaDB. And Anita, I'll bring you back into the conversation here. We've talked about lift and shift versus really redesigning and redeploying. which I think is the optimal way to go. There is a lot of trepidation in the business, I'm sure, especially if you're talking about transactional systems, the systems that run your business. You're always going to have operations. People get a bit nervous if you start talking about migrating their data to some other environment. But the cloud is where it's at, folks. I mean, the cloud is the new center of gravity, as we mentioned, and you got to start somewhere. So, Anita, if you would share with us some best practices on how to get that done, how to keep an open mind about it, and how, as you suggest, Google and your team can meet customers where they are. Talk about what that means, Anita. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Eric. I think it's important to, first of all, to really, what's the right word here? To meet customers where they are, right? And I think what you mentioned, Eric, was such a good point where databases run, right? They're the back-end systems that run your most mission-critical applications. I mean, there's no application out there that's running that does not have a back-end database, right? Which means when you think about migrations or even moving anything that's related to databases, there's a lot of fear. So, I think one of the things that I advise, if you were thinking about it, if you're considering cloud, I would say put a plan together, right? I think, part of the migration process is really understanding what applications do you have, what are they running, right? When you're thinking about the cloud, what is the right platform for you to be thinking about? What are those applications that you're going to move as is because of different reasons? There's certain applications that you might think about modernizing, which is, maybe moving them from an open source engine to something that's much more cloud native. How do you think about even just building net new applications in the cloud? Because, of course, just because you have applications running, let's say, on your on-prem environment, it doesn't mean that you're not going to be building any new applications in the future. So what's that journey look like, right? So I think starts with planning, right? Plan it out. Don't be afraid. And then also just realize that just like anything else, start small. And then over time, increase those, the movement of those applications into the cloud, tap into resources that exist for you. If you're looking at partners, if you're looking at any existing tools that are out there, we integrate with a lot of partner tools like Stream. If you're looking at, cloud native tools for us, like a database migration service, but what does that look like for you? So again, planning, don't be afraid, and then just start, right?
I love it. Planning, don't be afraid, and you got to start somewhere. And to your point, think through what you're trying to accomplish. What is core to your business? I think one positive aspect of this whole COVID pandemic thing that we've gone through now is that it really forced us all to reflect, of course, on our personal lives, but also on business and how we get business done. And it revealed a lot of realities about life, one of which is that a lot of work can be done remotely. And Andrew, you've been working remotely for a while, so you know all about that. I think Anita is right. The key is to start planning and start informing yourself about what's possible, and really allow yourself to think through what is the ideal end state. What do I want to improve? Is it the customer experience? Is it partner experience? Is it efficiency in terms of close rates, or whatever the case may be? What are the metrics that drive your business, and how can a new database architecture enable that? Does that sound about right, Andrew?
I think that's right. I think also you want to give yourself some headroom. You want to give yourself the ability to elastically scale, because a lot of times we saw this in 2020, right? Suddenly a lot of businesses had no business in March, and other businesses had more than they'd ever had in March. And then something changed and it fluctuated. We've got a lot more spiky kind of behavior. So you need architectures that can handle massive upticks in utilization and be able to scale back to save costs. You don't want to write a big fat check to your cloud vendor on your worst day. I think you also want to maintain your independence, because if you look at the companies that said, hey, we're going to standardize on Oracle a decade ago or whatever, then they got hit with these new requirements as far as 24/7 uptime, absolute availability, lower latency, customer engagement, and customer engagement with your system of record. And they're having to re-architect things. They have technology for MariaDB to make it more compatible, but they had to deal with that. So you want to try and keep that same level of independence, whether it be a cloud vendor or sticking to query languages like SQL that have some standards and what have you. I disagree that there's a conflict between open source and cloud native. I think cloud native is largely developed in open source, and that open source is a key way that the cloud native technologies are being developed. I think that you can use all or largely open source developed technology in a cloud native format without having to move to a proprietary vendor kind of, I guess, lock-in.
Yeah, right. And Anita, I'll throw this one over to you for some closing comments. We always talk about scale up or scaling out, I should say, in the cloud when demand peaks, but scaling back down is half the challenge, right? If you can't scale back down, and that's one of the real concerns with on-prem environments. If you're relying entirely on your on-prem environment, you have to design for the highest peak level of activity. You can't scale back down very easily, and that becomes pretty expensive over time in terms of total cost of ownership. So real quick, Anita, your thoughts on the ability to scale down as well as scale out. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that flexibility, and then this is probably one of those benefits of cloud, right? I think you always heard it, right, from when folks were making the case of why should you move to the cloud, right? But I think the ability of going in and provisioning additional resources when you need them, and the ability to be able to say, okay, that peak that I had for Black Friday, guess what? It's gone, right? That peak was for a day or maybe a week, right? And now I want to be able to go back and say that, okay, now I'm back to my regular state of business, right? And I think the ability to be able to do that is fundamental. But even more so, I think for a lot of customers is understanding what does that peak look like for you from a cost perspective. I think Andrew touched a little bit on this one, right? Mm-hmm. The idea of like, if I can plan for it, if I can plan and know what traffic I might see for Black Friday and be able to plan for it, right, then at least I know how much it's going to cost me, right? And then be able to ramp back down when I need to, right? Just allows you to be better prepared. Honestly, I think for a lot of businesses, it's all about preparation, right? And just not being able to be caught off guard, right? Mm-hmm. I think once you're able to plan, even better for you.
Yeah, there's a great expression that says luck is when opportunity meets preparation. And I think that really speaks to what Anita just mentioned there. Andrew, I'll throw it over to you. This is the importance of planning, right? Wasn't it Eisenhower who said, I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. Point being, you learn things when you plan and you spend more time planning, you're going to do a better job of understanding the possibilities. And then even if your plan goes out the window, you're much better suited to re-architect that plan and redesign and redeploy. What do you think, Andrew?
I think that's true. I think when it comes to capacity planning, the one thing that you can be guaranteed on is that you're absolutely wrong. I think to paraphrase Eisenhower differently, because even if you plan for that blue line and the average of between your peak and your lowest utilization, you're still wrong almost all of the time. So being able to have an architecture that scales back and scales out when you need is absolutely critical. Anything that you see from Gartner or anybody else will talk about how much of the cloud spend is wasted. And I think that part of that is a lot of times we're using fairly static architectures that don't have that capability, which is a key thing that we've kind of architected into expand to be able to give you the ability to scale out and scale back. And great plan. Let's plan. Let's have multiple redundancies and availability zones, replicate in between regions, and do all the right things. But we know we're going to be wrong, so let's have an architecture that can adapt to how wrong we usually are.
That's pretty funny. It's actually a very practical worldview. It might sound pessimistic, but it's really more pragmatic, is that on capacity planning, you're always going to be wrong. I mean, we see this in the supply chains with material goods. It's very difficult these days. It's a very turbulent world in terms of supply chains for lots of different reasons. COVID, war, all sorts of things are happening, but it applies to the data world as well. It's a little bit easier to handle in the data world, but you do have to think these things through. And that's why we had these guests online today. So big thanks to our guests today. We've been talking, of course, to Andrew Oliver and Anita Kibunguchy-Grant. Thank you for your time. We'll talk to you next time. You've been listening to Inside Analysis.